Oh, disconnected altogether, probably. Okay, let's wait a few minutes also for Jaime to come back. Any volunteer to take minutes today and be Jabber Scribe?
I can help out, but I'll be presenting in 3 slots, so I
Thank
can
you.
only...
We'll find one more person at least. Thanks.
I lost the connection there for a second. Sorry.
Welcome back.
Yeah, we have still people are not here, but I have a funny anecdote. Yeah, so I have one socket right here where I have the Mocula connected. This phone Mocula is like a small mobile router. And yesterday I unplugged it for a moment and forgot to plug it in, and the battery ran out just like a minute ago. So that's why I got disconnected. Anyways, is the audio okay, or?
Yeah, that works fine. We got Christian offering to help take you minutes, but he's also going to present a few things. So one more minute taker would be good for today. Anyone that wants to help?
And still, I mean, it might be that we don't need to start right away. We still have a couple of minutes maybe, or 1 or 2 minutes more in case some more people join.
Yeah.
I don't see everybody yet. As usual, if possible, Marco or I would help with the minutes, but we need.
I will.
We really do need one more because it becomes too cumbersome. Should we volunteer people at random? Maybe we need a Miteco feature, like congratulations, you have been selected.
That W3C has. W3C has a robot called Zakim that they use on their IRC chats. And one of the things you can do is ask Zakim to randomly pick a scribe. And it remembers who was the scribe in your working group previously and tries not to pick the same person every time.
That's a nice feature.
You should have that.
I like it.
I'll help.
Francesca, did you say something? Sorry.
I said I will help.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay, so start sharing the screen. Nice. What's going on? Okay, so should we start? We are already 5 minutes past. So welcome to the core session, and good morning to everybody, those in Europe, and good evening or good night, and for those in Asia, I guess it's good afternoon or it's earlier actually. Anyways, I'm Jaime, and Marco and I, and we are Jaime Jimenez and Marco Tiloca. We are the chairs, and we are going to be conducting the session this morning. We assume that everybody has read the drafts as usual. And that everybody is aware of the IPR potential, like the way the IPR works in IETF. We won't need blue sheets this time; they're automatically taken. We already have JavaScripts. Do we have JavaScripts?
Not formally, but I can have a look at the chat.
I can. Okay, I can also do that as well. And we already have 2 note takers. Thank you, Christian and Francesca. Remember that the note well applies for the IETF interactions. Well, we have the queue request in Miteco. We have also some new features for doing some sort of humming, which is the show of hands, which maybe we will use. For queuing, as usual, just type mic colon and ask and so on. And the meeting will be recorded. And as I said, the blue sheets are already automatically filled. So for today's, this is the agenda. We will start with RD and stateless and a few other material drafts, and then move to GroupCom and OSCORE. And Friday will be whatever is left from this time. As you can see, we have 2 hours each time, so probably there won't be anything left out. And I think we have plenty of time. So time for agenda bashing. All right. So some of the documents. So RD, as if you have been in the interims, you have seen that we have done a lot of progress, and that at this point, well, Christian will give an update, but essentially it's on the AD table. All of the ISG comments were addressed, and I have to finish the write-up. I will take some notes from this session, but after that, I think we are done. On stateless, similar situation, pretty much on AD follow-up, and we will have the presentation by Michael. The VRN, we've had some updates by Jari, and I think also pretty much ready. And similarly with Echo request tag. So we have quite good progress. I think we can accomplish. I mean, this can be done very quickly. And let's see how the session develops for the first 2. Then on post working group last call, so we are awaiting the write-up on the CoreConf cluster, and yeah, that's essentially the status, I believe. And then for OSCORE GroupCom, so the working group last call has concluded, and the comments were processed. I believe Marco, correct me if I'm wrong, like we needed a few more reviewers, or what was
the review
the
came during the hackathon from Christian. So next step is to process that review, and well, I have an update in the presentation later.
Perfect. So that's it. Without further ado, I guess we can start with with resource directory. Christian, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Then I am not ready. I'll remove my video. Sorry.
So this is hopefully one of the later updates of resource directory. Next slide, please. We've published a dash 26 just before the cutoff, which includes all the changes that were necessary due to the IESG review. I won't go through all of them here because there is a detailed changelog, and if you have anything particular, then please look it up there. But there's 4 things that I'd like to point out. First is that a new section was added, basically a new security policy was added. For previously, this only outlined how a security policy means what a security policy could do, and now we have a concrete example, which may be chosen by implementations as a default policy. If you have something that's kind of install and run, that this is something that it can do. There was a lot of clarification around the discovery process, which now says more explicitly that the host discovery itself, which often comes from things like DHCP options, etc., is not particularly relied on in terms of security, but the path discovery is, if there are in particular cases. One change that might come as a surprise to implementers is that we found out that that basically we didn't think of whether it's a good idea to use the well-known core resource, just post simple registrations there as well. It turned out there's no really good reason to answer that that question that came about that, so it was actually changed to a new well-known resource, to be registered resource, and a lot of the examples had our resource type values that were based in the core interfaces draft, which is not active enough to really warrant having using registered values there that are not actually registered. So that was changed in favor of short URIs. And one more change you might have seen in the last document, thanks to the other authors for offering me to kind of shuffle to the top position of the authors list. So this all, next slide please. There were a few questions that we did address as the questions themselves, but there was follow-up work to do, or there's still follow-up work to do that has not wound up in the document yet. And there's roughly 3 topics around this. First is the topic of DTLS replays. So the original comment here was that we're using DTLS like TLS, so it might be a good idea to enable replay protection. But really the same thing. So the one thing where replays can be problematic is where is not immediately mitigated by turning on replay protection. So even if we turn on replay protection, it would still be possible to exploit something like a device registering and deregistering repeatedly, and then injecting a message in which the device's registration is deleted without the device actually having authorized this. Next slide, please. So there is a work in progress text to mitigate that. We've also talked about this and other ways of doing and alternative methods during the interims. This just basically needs to be finished in terms of text and then get a few pairs of eyes from the working group and wind up in the -27. It's using the ACRON mechanism from ACRO request tag, which is also used in other parts of the document already. So we're not bringing in anything conceptually new. We're just referring to a mechanism that's specified somewhere else. Next slide, please. Another question that came up was, how much can you trust the links from the resource directory? And there's a simple answer that is that the security policies tell you that. But from the white space on the bottom of the slide, you can tell that this is not all of it. Next slide, please. So if a device uses the authorizations it has to create a request, then it has an intention. It phrases this into a request, and that request then has either a side effect or gives it the response. Slide, please. In concrete, this might mean that a device wants to create a topic, and then discovering a property of a particular resource phrases this into a request, let's say a post request to /topics, and then the topic gets created. And while the process between the request and the action is well protected, we don't really have much in terms of how does the device, how can the server be sure that what the client intended is what the client put into its request? Next slide, please. So in terms of the resource directory, I don't think we have anything much more to do. So we already stated in earlier versions that this is something to take care about when thinking of application of the integration between the resource directory and the security policies. Due to the latest changes, we now also follow that same advice when it comes to how the resource directory is discovered. But we should probably have some more discussion on how this was mitigated in the general case. So one way of doing it is saying that a server should really only use have one function. This is something commonly done in OAuth, but that means we get a lot of security contexts. This could mean that we introduce a way of verifying statements to the resource directory. This would all, or in other means of discovery, I mean, the resource directory is a cache, and the same applies for multicast response and so on. And possibly also to talk in a more fine-grained way about the permission, about the roles that a server might serve in, which is probably a topic for for ACE. But this is something I'd like to have more discussion on in the general core context. Next slide, please. And the third upcoming change for -27 is the topic of examples and the link format representation. Yeah, again, so we are doing two things with respect to RFC 690 link format. That is one, we describe that there is a subset that we think that everyone who's implemented can actually work with, because there is a few bits of misalignment between the actual implementations that also stems from ambiguity in the original document. And the other thing is that we prescribe that both the link target and the anchor need to be fully expanded. Next slide, please. Thing is, the reading of the document of 690 that caused the most trouble and the most overhead in terms of bytes on the wire was my reading. And in the discussion, I think that from the discussion, I take it that this reading was wrong, and that we can simplify what we send on the wire a lot, like factor of 2 in many cases. And so pending a check of the other implementations, which I've reviewed about 2 years ago, which I need to go over again, this could still be changed to not prescribe that the anchor must be there unconditionally, but give a still simple but way sharper rule about when it needs to be there, and update the examples accordingly. Next slide, please. So that's the three things that still should probably change in a follow-up document. So the mail to the reviewers also indicated that this is addressing their concerns as they were phrased, but those questions raised more questions, and they will be answered in a -27, and I hope to have this in a submittable state around the start of December. Questions, comments? Do you still hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
This is Barry Leva. I saw that you, when you posted 26, you sent a note to the 3 ADs who have discusses on the resource directory document, and they haven't responded yet, which was now about 2 weeks ago. It would be good to follow up on that and make sure it doesn't get lost. I'm sure they were busy leading up to the meeting, so maybe in another week, ping them again and remind them that they should have a look.
So I got one, I didn't keep track of who sent that exactly. I got one mail about a ballot that's about to be cleared, but I'll follow up with the others. Thank you.
I think that was Ben, yeah. But I think the 2 Erics still need to be pinged. So. Anyway, I'm just saying, just remember to follow up on it and don't let them drag it, because we get busy and we forget. So.
Christian. I don't know, Francesca stepped into the queue here. Otherwise, my question is, I haven't followed the details. This protecting the intention. How can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So the thing is, the client has something in mind when it wants to send a request, and it's using material that it has around about the server. So that might be a link, that might be attributes on a link, that might even be a form, that might be something that it got from a 401. You'll need to register with that AS response. And not all of that information the client will have from a source that it can trust as much as it can trust the origin server. And assembling that information into requests means that if that information is grossly misleading, the request might be not what the client intended, but will still be executed with whatever credentials the client has. So if, say, you're trying to create a topic and you're discovering from for example, from a resource directory that there is a resource with that property that indicates that you can just post there and then a topic gets created, then if that information is wrong, for example, if actually on that resource there is a thing that says, please DOS me, in a very blunt example, then the client would authorize that action, believing that it means something different. And this intention is not part of what we authenticate even with the request response bindings that we have in OSCORE. So
thanks. I think that makes sense. That was sort of my understanding when you presented it in more detail. My problem is what do you plan to do about it? How can you? The
easiest thing to do it is for the application to carefully differentiate between what is a hint, and that's also what we already say in resource directory. What is a hint? Like if there is an indication of content of accepted content types on a resource, the worst thing that will happen is that the content types will be downgraded, but the interaction will still be the same. And what is a statement that is really necessary to come from a trusted source, and then for the client to differentiate, can I use this piece of information or can I not? And once we have that in place, we can think more about how can a client get by that piece of information in a more efficient way without doing a round trip through the origin server all the time. Things like OSCORE will come to mind.
Right. Thank you.
Francesca, please. Sorry, you were in the queue.
Yeah, basically, Göran said what I wanted to ask. But I wanted to ask more about these single-use servers, which I didn't really understand how that.
The idea is just don't have a PubSub server and a DOS.me server run on the same within the same security context, and then you'll be talking to different resource servers and have different security associations with them. So you can accidentally hit the wrong button.
So my question is, are these the bullets in slide?
Next slide from here.
Yes, these are to be taken together. These are not several different options, or
these are different options that may be combined.
Okay. Thanks.
But again, these options will be out of the scope of RD as such.
Yes, because RD says that do the second one and hopefully do it well, but we don't have good guidance to point to.
May I ask, are you planning to add these to the RD extensions or a different document? not
I
important.
think they should. I think one place this should definitely wind up is the discussion about Coral, because Coral forms are way more powerful in the sense that that whoever presents the form can make the client issue more complex, a wider variety of statements. Matthew? I think we have Matthew on the queue, but no one else is talking. So Matthew, you can just unmute yourself with the top right button.
Marco, we don't hear you if you are speaking as well.
No.
Matt, we cannot unmute you. You need to unmute yourself and just speak.
Can you try again, Matt? Maybe you can't hear us either now.
Well, Matt, just feel free to jump in later also, so that we have all the questions, or use the chat. There it is. So I'll relay from the Jabber.
Yeah.
Can you read it also, Christian?
Yeah, the question is, can the security issues be addressed with link layer security? Only if the link layer security extends to the origin server, which in most cases it will not. So link layer security might get you to the resource directory, but in the general case, it won't get you to the origin server and will not give you any better statements about the any better verification on the statements that the client will act on. Okay, thank you.
We see you. We do not hear you yet. Maybe you are muted still. Maybe I can. Oops. Michael, we don't hear you, or I don't hear you at least.
Same here. I can hear Michael.
Oh, Michael, we don't hear you. Can you try again? Let me just revoke this. Try again. Try once again. You are muted. The video is okay, but you are muted. Do we need to give some permission or something?
No,
Marco?
no. That should be all on his side.
Yeah, seems that there's few glitches here and there on the various browsers.
How about now?
Yeah, now
That
we hear
works.
you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's reloaded again. So it's been disconnected about 3 times since we started the meeting. Okay, so core stateless. So it's stuck on review comments since May. Next slide, please. These slides are mostly the same as in the virtual interim. This is really the update. So a bunch of these were marked as won't fix. You can go through them and read the comments if you like about this, and there's some emails about that on the list. Next slide, please. One of the things was a suggestion to use automatic key management, but that would only really apply if, in fact, there was another peer. So in this case, what we're talking about is A node is going to send a token to another node. The other node is not going to decrypt it, but rather is going to echo it back with the response. And so actually, you can use any kind of randomly generated key you like. And you just encrypt your token, and then when you get it back, you decrypt your token. So you just basically have to make sure that you still have the key around, and that it's strong enough or fast enough to deal with the fact that you could have an attacker trying to send you lots of random nonsense. So you don't want to burn out your battery trying to deal with that. So there's a preference for using, for instance, whatever hardware accelerated encryption algorithm you have. The text now has some recommendations and some issues about the replay window, which is to say how long you will stick around and allow keys to, responses to arrive out of order before you start saying, well, wait a minute, they're probably too old and I won't accept anymore. An attacker could, for instance, instead of just making up a token, could, for instance, record some data and play it back at you to either cause you to redo something that was not idempotent, or to just to mess up your network that way. Next slide, please. So the 60 minutes had to do with the replay minute. So we've got some better text for that. It's been reviewed, and some of the other text relating to the integrity protection that I just was speaking about. Next slide, please. So 07 was uploaded on the 12 on November 2. 08 was uploaded 25 minutes ago. As I was pointed out, that it could now be uploaded. And Ben has replied actually today, just or whatever that means today, a few hours ago, and has cleared the discuss, and there may be one additional cycle perhaps about some tweaking some words, but I don't think so. And that's it. Any questions?
I believe, oh, sorry, go ahead, Barry.
Barry again, just let me know when you think it's ready to go, and I'll give it a final check and do the approval.
I think that with 08, it's ready to go.
Okay, so you don't want to make any tweaks.
I don't know. I'm just saying there could be a conversation about moving a word here or there, but I don't think it will fall into the category of discuss.
Okay, well, yeah, it's and anything that you get that's a minor editorial thing, we can do it off for you anyway. So, okay,
Yeah,
I'll give it a look over then and send out the approval.
Thank you very much.
Michael, I believe Klaus gave some comments yesterday. Those are also they were positive, but just to know if you have to have a look at them. They are in
I have not seen them. I'll look in the archive.
Okay.
Yeah, I've just woken up for Tuesday, so
yeah, no problem. They should be on the issue tracker. No, I don't think that it was on the mailing list.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Then I haven't dealt with them. And Barry, maybe I take back what I just said.
No,
so let me.
Sorry,
go
ahead.
They're positive.
Sorry. They are positive. They're mostly positive. So I think you wouldn't have to change anything.
Okay, well then that's great. All right.
But have a look just in case.
Okay, great.
I see there is a discussion on MeetEcho, but it's not related to this. And now we have your video as well. So any comments on stateless? Anything, any last thoughts before we conclude the draft? Well, when Michael sends the 08.
So I actually have 2 copies of myself as video because I already thought I was sending video. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this was a very brief presentation, but I think everything has been pretty much covered during the interim, so maybe there is no need to dwell any longer on this topic. Another comment, sorry. No. All right, there is no. Okay, then let's move on to the next topic. Just a second. Thank you, Michael. By the way, thank you for the very quick, agile way of preparing the slides. So that it was a bit last-minute request. So I believe the next one was yeah, secure group communication. So group on BIS. Just a second. Okay. Yes, go. We have audio issues again.
Yeah, same as before.
Yeah, same as before. But we do see you. We see the video. Hey, morning.
Can you try to reset the audio stream on the bottom right of the window, Esco? That seems to do the work for many.
I think we all are using flavors of Chrome one way or another. So I think that's a recommended browser, probably. Not to advertise anything in particular, but
Okay, now it should work.
yes,
Now we hear you
now. Please go ahead.
I think you have to reset first and then unmute again. So that's the trick. So it happens if you were not connected to audio before, I think. Then okay, maybe let's start with the presentation now. Group communication. So we are presenting here this revision 2. Yeah, this is just an overall goal of group communication. Yeah, okay, let's show this slide. So it's intended as the successor of RFC 7390, and now recast as a standards track document. And in scope is co-op group communication over UDP IP, and now also possibly secured with group OSCORE. Okay, next slide, please. So I'll give now an overview of the status updates of the 02 revision. And there's also the tickets linked to that. So the first thing we changed, was to clarify the messaging and endpoint model. We had some discussion that the server might actually respond from a different UDP port. And that turns out to be a legitimate way of responding to multicast in co-op. So this is now clarified in the messaging model text. And then issue number 2, that's a very small change. We had some requirement for consistency for response suppression. So now it's based on the class of the response code. So if a server typically suppresses a response of a certain class like 4.x or 5.x due to policies, then it should be consistent so that all the responses of that class are also suppressed. And number 3 is basically the section that we had on group definition. It was some big piece of text, so this is now expanded into subsections. And we have more details on the relations between the different group types. So there's the co-op group, application group, and the security group. There's also the option added after discussion that we could use the URI host option for encoding application group, and that's a possible way to do it. But on the other hand, it has some problems of its own, so I also added a best practice for how groups are typically included in co-op requests, which is in the URI path. But of course, both methods are fine to use. Okay, next slide, please. And the next change was that the fetch method was also included. Many places were applicable. So where before it said get, we now say often is get or fetch if it applies. Also in the observe and the blockwise sections, that is included now. And there were quite some changes in the text, so that falls under the various enhancement and editorial. One of these things is, for example, explaining that you can do re-registration with observe as well, so a little bit more detail. All right, let's move to the next slide now. So this is just a picture corresponding to this issue number 1, where the server response may come from a different UDP port at the server. So we've shown this also in a previous presentation, I think, in either the interim or the previous IETF meeting. Okay, the next slide, please. Yeah, so what are the next steps of this draft? Yeah, there was some feedback from Marco I received last minute, so I think he can tell more about it. So one of the first things was due to the interop experience last week, it was the idea to move the handling of multiple co-op responses from the co-op layer to the application layer. So that means maybe some text in 2.3.1 on this needs to be changed. And the second point was the proxy operation 233 is not really talking about much about caching of responses. And I think what we need to do is first explore maybe some scenarios in caching. So suppose a client sends out a request to a proxy, and that leads to a group communication operation. So the proxy sends out the multicast and receives the responses to that. So are there situations where the proxy can actually suppress the sending of the multicast request? So what if another client comes and does a similar or the same request? Can it actually suppress, in that case, the sending of multicast requests and instead serve from the cache? And also, is the proxy able to do a cache refresh? So it, for example, it knows it already has 90% of the responses cached, and they are fresh as well. So can it do a refresh to see if there are other devices that just joined the same group and are not in the cache yet? So this is a bit of a still open topic, also open for discussion here if people want. It's relatively new. So I think this concludes the presentation. There's one thank you slide still with the link. So if there's any issues, please mail or use the issue tracker to report. Oh yeah, no, one more thing. Yeah, there's more reviews would also be good for this draft. I just marked here Christian and Francesca, I think, who made a promise at IETF109 to do a review. And also what we think also want to do is to test more in co-op implementations and for example observe combined with multicast, and also report the results of the testing on this. All right, that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Esko. We have a comment from Karsten in the chat. Karsten, if you want to take it on the mic.
Well, yeah, it's just fantasizing. Wouldn't it be nice if we could e-tags for all responses that we have in cache? I don't know how to make this work, but response suppression based on having cached information already available would be a nice feature.
Yeah, I was also thinking of these something like these e-tags indeed, so that the many servers maybe only need to respond when their information has changed with respect to the cached request. So that could be a direction indeed. But I haven't thought myself that much about it yet.
Kristen, I'm just we've brought this up in a discussion during the hackathon, and I don't think that there's anything that would stop this from working, other than the server needing to react on. Oh wait, no, sorry, I missed something that we found there. Yeah, sure. The server wouldn't know if there's any other. The client wouldn't know if any servers had collisions on their e-tags. So that's the hard point there.
Collisions on e-tags?
One server's e-tag that matches another server's e-tag that just happened to change to that value.
Okay, yeah, you would have to include some server identification together with the e-tag, because the request addresses somebody different from who the e-tags are associated with. So that's why this becomes big and ugly very quickly, and why I haven't actually made a proposal out of that. But I think maybe we can continue to think in that direction.
Another possibility we explored in that hackathon discussion was that the client might send a request with a very small block size, which at least allows the servers to send short responses and then the client to follow up with those servers that actually have changes.
Yeah, that could also fit to the group communication model a bit. So you typically want to not send large responses back by the servers, but they typically would send a short message back or a short response or their first block. Thomas is commenting if you want the head method. Yeah, that's basically, I think in co-op, that's the blockwise transfer, right? That's a similar, although, yeah, it's more implicit than a head method. Exactly. All right. So any more comments?
Seems not, also in the chat. So I guess you can hear me and see me now?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So this is an update of the GrupoScore document, now in its version 10. Next slide, please. The version 10 that we submitted right before the cutoff includes updates, mostly addressing comments we received following the working group last call that closed in July. 2 reviews out of them, and more comments that came up around IETF109 and right after. So I have an overview of them in the next slides. Otherwise, we had a third, I think, interop set of tests during the past hackathon with 3 different implementations involved. And for the first time, we also tested successfully the pairwise mode of GrupoScore, considering different algorithms and different combination of roles. So more tests are planned, but I think we have covered all the main functionalities here now. And again, during the hackathon last week, we received a review from Christian. Thank you very much for that, of this version 10 that we'll process for the next round. Next slide, please. Right, an overview of the updates in this version 10. Some regarded the security context. It was noticed some information was just redundant, so we removed the counter-signature key parameters, as all that information is indicated already in the counter-signature parameters, entry related to the algorithm. While we also added some more parameters in the common context, highlighted in red here, describing the algorithm and the properties for the pairwise mode, if this is supported, of course. As a suggestion also around working group last call, we added the possibility for a server to reply with a 503 error to a client in case all is in principle fine, but the server doesn't have a recipient context already right at the moment, especially doesn't have the public key for that client, and is not a good time right now to go and retrieve that. So client, please come back soon to me, and we can make it work. Of course, it's an optional thing to do for the server rather than just responding with a general error like context not found. We have also worked on non-recycling policies of IDs at the group manager. What we say right now is to never ever reassign the same sender ID value in the same group. Based on Christian's review, there's an open point about slightly relaxing it, but I'll come to that later on. Instead, we never reuse the same group ID value, so the same ID context for the same group during its lifetime. Next slide, please. Right, something happened also for the sequence number. Eventually, we converge for keeping things as they are for the space of value. So we keep one single space shared for both the group mode and the pairwise mode. But we introduced a change so that whenever the context is updated or re-established, meaning a new sender ID is assigned or there's a whole group rekeying and the key material changes, the sender sequence number is reset to 0. And that simplifies a lot also for other group members to understand that a change of key material has happened in the first place. We've better clarified the requirement that wasn't too clear in the previous version. If a response is protected with a latest new context, which happens to be different from the one used to protect the request because of an interleaved rekeying, well, the server definitely has to use its sender sequence number as partial AV to be included in the response to avoid answer usage. Also, now that, as I mentioned before, the sender sequence number is reset in case of rekeying, and we still want to have observations surviving across a possible rekeying, we need to do something to be sure that a given notification cannot match with more than one original registration request cryptographically. That means that all observations have to be linked with the same original observation request, also by the original group ID that was used when the registration request was sent. And that practically meant including one more parameter in the external AID as request KID context, specifying, in fact, the original group ID value used in the registration request. So this is beneficial and necessary for observations only, but practically it ends up in the external IDs for all messages, of course. Next slide, please. Okay, and something more, again, on supporting observation. Exactly for what I've just mentioned, we were saying already in previous versions that the client and the server have to store the original KID from the registration request. Now they just have to do the same also for the original group ID. And to clarify some comments around this from Working Group Last Call, the client technically has to store them only if it really cares about having observations from his side surviving across a possible group rekeying. Otherwise, it can just choose to forget about them in that case and doesn't need to store those values. Again, in that case, it's also beneficial for the client to store an invariant identifier of the OSCORE group that really never changes across group rekeyings. And that can practically be what we call group name in related ACE documents. And that simplifies for the client the possible dialogue later on with the group manager to retrieve updated group key material by still using this constant group name, even in case of group rekeying. Next slide, please. Thanks. So that concludes the update on version 10. Some highlights from Christian review, and before coming to open points to share with the group. There was one main point that we discussed for several hours during the hackathon, concluding that the draft should give a better distinction between the anti-replay and possible freshness requirements that have to be, of course, addressed in different ways, which includes also better clarification of what we mean with a server synchronizing with the client, which is strictly related to freshness. And building on this, we have different approaches for synchronization in Appendix E. And out of the discussion, we could understand that we definitely still need the approach on Appendix E3 based on the echo exchange for the sake of making replay windows valid and also achieve freshness thanks to that. But then that basically, following those clarifications, would make the current approaches in E1 and E2 well, basically moot as not contributing to freshness and not contributing to anti-replay very much other than what you already have from a correct and valid replay window. So they can possibly just be removed. And while discussing on this, we found also one more possible reason to have a loss of mutable security context of part of it, and especially the recipient context. That can happen because servers have memory limitations that practically set a maximum amount of recipient context that can be around at the same time inside the group context. Well, when that limit is reached, and as new clients continue to come, the server has to destroy a current recipient context to leave room for a new one. When this kind of overflow is reached, from then on, if the server creates a new recipient context, it can be a recreation of one context that used to be there. And essentially, from then on, each newly created recipient context would start with an invalid replay window. And from then on, is replay protection is still important. That server either has to be rekeyed through the group manager, or it has to run the echo exchange again, gaining freshness too. So this has all to be clarified better in the next version, in fact. Next slide, please. And then we have also some open points following from this review. I mentioned one before about relaxing the non-recycling of sender IDs from the group manager. Now it really says never ever for the group manager, never give the same sender ID in the same group. That eventually leads for larger and larger KIDs in size, and there's no way back for that. We thought that we can possibly relax this so that sender IDs don't have to be recycled ever under the same group ID value. But if there is a rekeying and the group ID value changes, the currently used sender IDs are locked again, but any value free at that moment becomes also safely available to be assigned. Is there any issue anyone sees on this change? Yes, Ko and Joran.
Okay, Joran here. So how do you make sure that you actually only recycle when you've changed the GID? Or I mean, maybe that's trivial, but
it's still under the control of the group manager after all, and the rekeying and the change of group ID is triggered by the group manager, so it knows when it becomes safe.
So it's the assignment from the group manager. That's what. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I was not in the queue, but I did have a question anyhow. So there was, I think, the group ID value. So will that ever change then, or is that also something that can change?
The group ID changes if the key material changes, because the group manager ultimately takes the decision to rekey the group. When the group ID changes, and that happens in case of rekeying, we're just saying it's possible that sender IDs not currently used really at the moment can also become free for reassignment, and it's safe to do.
Yeah, well, that sounds at least safe to me to do that, so no issues.
Okay, thank you. And next other point was about the external AAD structure. On the left, you see what we have now. One version is for the encryption operation, and one version is for the signing operation for the group mode only. We started with this design before adding in the last version request KID context. Because before doing that, the version on the extreme left for encryption was really mirroring the version from OSCORE, while we introduced the version for signing only for the group mode. But now that we have added request KID context, the version for encryption already is essentially deviating into.
Okay, I think the video is lost for Marco. Yeah, we lost your video and audio for a brief moment.
To be used both for encryption and signing, of course.
Yeah, Göran here. I think that sounds reasonable, but we need to look at the details.
Okay. There's a comment on the chat, I think. Oh no, just on the lost audio. Okay. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, and more on the external AD. It was noted again that as is today already, we have again that redundancy.
Christian, I think whatever we do there should be aligned with how those things are precisely defined in COSI.
Did we just lose Marco?
Yeah, I saw his video disappear now. Yeah.
And there he's back.
You lost me?
Yep, but the video got cut for a second.
Okay, everything reset on my side. Okay, I think I was asking, should we do this deletion in the external AD structure? Any opinion? Okay, we'll leave it open also to discuss on the list. And one last point, I think, is still related to the external AD structure. Right now, we are covering the current set of existing and registered COSI algorithms, for each of which the only algorithm capability registered is the key type. And that results also in the par countersign parameter to specify, in fact, only the capabilities of that key type in turn. So we started to wonder if we can take this opportunity to generalize this format a bit more for possible future algorithms that COSI would theoretically admit that can have 0 or more than 1 capability and then require more information to be expressed there as capabilities in par countersign. And there is a kind of abstract meta format that we can consider for it. But for what we have today, they would practically become what we have already, so to say, hard-coded in detail in the document. Any comment or input on this? You can still hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes. I was thinking this new format you propose. So is it kind of backwards compatible with what is there today, or is it a small change?
It is backward compatible, meaning that on the practical value you build today with current implementation, nothing changes, but it's more flexible looking forward, actually.
Okay, it's more like the definition is then ready for the future.
Yeah.
Kind
exactly.
of. Okay, that sounds good at least.
Okay, I'll open issues on GitHub for all these points and more from Christian's review anyway. Next slide, please, and that should be the last one. Okay, yeah, this version has addressed comments for working group last call and around the previous meeting. We've had a successful test at the hackathon, as next step is submitting version 11, addressing Christian's review, and run even some more tests, again in pairwise mode, testing also some error conditions. That concludes it. And hi, maybe you're sharing your screen, at least I'm not seeing it. Maybe it's just my side though.
Oh, I'm sharing. I think, Esco, can you see it?
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Okay.
We are now on the last slide with the thank you comments.
Yeah. That's okay then.
And Carsten also says that it works for him. So Christian, do you have some comments?
No, sorry, I was just unmuting because I'm kind of next up in the queue.
Okay, so I guess no more comments then.
Thank you.
Well, then, thank you, Marco. Just a second. We are now halfway on the time-wise, so we still have an hour to go. Well, now 53 minutes to be precise. So Christian, whenever you are ready.
Yep, hang on. Now it's okay. Now it's sorry. I'll just get in again.
So Christian, if you are here, manifest, please. Manifest yourself.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you. There is no video, but this is
we can do without.
Yep.
So to recap, what this is all about. When a device enters a network that is configured to join a group, it may have very limited information. So it may know that it has this particular application group, and it will probably have some credentials stored, but it may not know where this resource where this group actually is, how to join it, etc. And web linking can generally next slide, please. Web linking can generally help with that, and the resource directory is the typical place to make this more efficient in a core-based network. So what the device, when joining, can do is that it knows its application group, it queries the resource directory for the joining resource, and it may do something similar for getting the actual group address to join on. Next slide, please. So in the updates that were published before this IETF, we basically addressed the comments that came in and closed several of the open points. So we now state explicitly that a few things that the COSI registry theoretically allows can just not be done with link format, because it can't distinguish between a literal -2 and the digit -2. We've added a mechanism for discovering where the authorization server for a particular resource is located, which should allow which basically saves a round trip to the resource server but exchanges this for a round trip to the resource directory. Next slide, please. Which is okay. Now there's a few more updates when it comes to the precise values we're using for resource type and interface, which are now aligned better with other documents where they are partially moved or where they are taken from. So we don't specify any of this ourselves anymore. Next slide, please. What we do currently specify, because nothing else in ACE is doing this so far, is describe how those web links can be used to discover where the authorization server for a particular resource is located. So when the registration is done in this way with this additional piece of information on the left, then in the discovery process on the right, the client can send an additional resource lookup query to find where the authorization server is. Now, this is not saving a lot when it's being done with link format, but with the possible future extensions to the format or to the queries, and especially with what might be possible with Coral queries, so with the Coral fetch format, there would be a lot to be saved here, because then this could save another round trip. Next slide, please. So one thing that was missing from -06 was how the information actually gets there about the application groups, because the group manager is set up to basically to just manage the security group and doesn't necessarily need to be aware of the application groups. Now, in alignment with OSCORE Group Manager administration, we describe how the group manager, or that describes that the group manager can be informed of the application groups that the security group would be later used for, and this puts the group manager in a position to register these application groups as parameters on its join resource, which are then used by the client to actually find it. There were also comments on the topic of multiple security groups being associated with the same application group, which we are not fully sure whether this would be used a lot at all. But if it's used, we now describe how it can work at all, which is that a server has to join all the groups associated with it, because the client might be a bit more constrained and needs to pick one of those security groups, because if it were the other way around, the client had to join all, and the client would need additional information, which it can't have, because the security groups are essentially equivalent, because they are all part of that application group. Next slide, please. So yeah, we are not done yet. We still have to add a few bits about how what metadata we can exchange with the group, and there will be a few updates based also on what is changing in RD-27. We plan to give this a test run based on existing implementations of the resource directory, and we'll hope to report output from there at the next session. Next slide, please. Okay, so thanks. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I did have one question, Christian.
Yep.
So that was basically on the linking of the application groups to the security group. So
yep.
Is this an optional thing in the way that you can also decide that the group manager does not know about any application groups, or?
The thing is, if the group manager does not know, I mean, someone needs to provide that information for the clients, because the clients will typically come in knowing their application group. So if that information is not passed to the group manager, then someone else can generally put it in the resource directory and register those statements about the join resource, but then that someone else needs to get all the information from the group manager about where the actual join resource for that security group is and what its properties are, and they would need to put that into resource directory. So yes, in principle, this doesn't need to be done by the group manager, but it appears now that this would be the logical choice.
Okay, so just because the clients will discover everything, including their application group, they need to join. So
the clients would know the application group. That would be basically part of the information they have.
Yeah.
But whether that's provided by the group manager or some other party, as long as the right link winds up in the resource directory, they won't care.
Okay, now I was thinking about cases where new groups get added later, but yeah, that just means that this information needs to be updated then in the resource directory at the moment that these groups are created, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Christian, I have a question. I haven't read the document. Sorry for that. It doesn't seem to be only tailored to OSCORE. I mean, like basically this is authorization and so registration, discovery, and of ACE servers on RD, right? It can be. It's very generic.
So the very point of this slide, yes, this could be used in a more generic way, and quite frankly, I'm kind of still hoping that this is getting picked up in ACE, and then we can do what we did for the other for the resource type on the interface, and just say that. And by the way, they are saying how it is done, and this could be used here as well. But right now, this has not been picked up. So. So right now it's sitting here, but yes, this particular step is more general.
Okay. Do we need any kind of communication in particular with ACE? I am not in contact, at least, with the ACE people. Maybe Marco, you are more in contact with them, but I'm wondering, like, is there something we can do, Marco and I, to help for ACE folks to pick this up? It sounds like an important feature. It looks very useful, actually, because authorization is a recurring topic on RD. I guess we all have had issues with that.
Several meetings ago, it was mentioned already a possible connection with ACE. We can check again with Daniel. There's no particular rush anyway.
So, Christian, what do you want to be picked up by ACE? Sort of what draft and what type of change would you like to see?
The link relation. So if ACE could say that one way of expressing that for accessing a particular resource, you would need to get a token from this particular AS, and this relation is expressed with the link relation type authorization server, or whichever gets picked, then that would be a small. That would be the core thing that I would ask ACE to review or to specify.
And that would be, would you see that as an update to the framework, or is it like a separate draft just saying that?
I don't see my way around the various ACE documents well enough to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough.
Karsten, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the most important part here is having the right security considerations around, because most successful attacks on OAuth are based on confusing the parties as to who the authorization server is. And we just added one more channel to create confusion. So I think it's really important that clients that rely on this information actually go through the right steps to validate them.
Mm-hmm.
Francesca, go ahead.
Yeah, concerning ACE, I would say that this would be a different document. To answer what Jörn was saying, yeah, I don't see how this could be fit into the framework right now. But I think it really fits ACE, and it would make sense to bring it there. Maybe just one more presentation and get feedback.
All right, thank you.
So maybe to briefly hook into what Carsten said on the topic of authorization. As I understand, the current way that is proposed in ACE is that the client contacts the server, gets back an error response that contains basically the same information, just not encoded in link format, but encoded in something different, but still unprotected, and then acts on that, which is at least something that we can take the security considerations from. Or bring to.
All right, Jörn?
Yeah, I was just about to say that I think there is actually time on the ACE agenda. So why don't you propose to bring this up tomorrow?
Yeah,
talk with Daniel.
Happily so.
Maybe you're muted, Carsten.
Well, nobody told me that it was my turn. Basically, to validate such an authorization server relationship, the client, if the validation of the authorization server relationship is based on validating something from the server, then of course a related question becomes, how do you validate a server in the first place? And there are gaps in the authorization flows, in the validation flows that are hard to build a successful, that make it hard to build a successful model, because right now a client somehow has to know all this information, or has to have a secret relationship to some manager that actually helps it validate that information. And we haven't really been talking about that part of the picture. And that's actually where the ACE actors document comes in and explains how to do that. But that has been on hold for a long time, and maybe it's time to actually resurrect that and complete the work on that. Yeah, trust anchors are great. Henk said on the chat, trust anchor stores. But again, whether a trust anchor actually provides you the right information to validate something specifically, that requires more information than just the trust anchor itself.
Sounds a lot like I have to spend more time with ACE. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe actually it's one of the things that we need this IoT ops group for, because ACE is kind of stuck in the OAuth past, and we really need a more comprehensive view of authorization flows. And I think the onboarding discussion is a good source of information in this environment. We have had a bit of onboarding discussion in the Think a Thing research group. And if IoT ops actually takes off, that may be a good focal point for getting that discussion going on.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any informal meeting for IoT ops this week? Just asking. Hank, you want to share a screen or just go ahead, go to the mic.
I'm just very clumsy with my mouse. Hi, all, this is Hank. No, there is no formal IoT Ops meeting this week, unfortunately. It's a timing issue. There are ISG meetings though, so but there will be a presentation on IoT Ops in the Ops AWG. And Rob will talk to that. And I think that is a point where to ask questions about when, where, why, and maybe this topic here, please. And I also can bring it up if nobody is joining and there's conflicts. I will do that, of course.
Thanks a lot. Can people hear me? Actually, the icon that shows the audio doesn't show anything at the moment.
Can we hear you?
Okay, great. So then we move to the, thank you, Christian. I guess it's time to move to the next presentation. I'm just checking the time and yeah, we got a bit carried away.
We are 20 minutes late, but we can still make it.
Yeah.
We had a lot of flex time.
I like it that it's not rushed. It's actually really good because we have more discussions and more comments. So, but anyways, Christian, you're still on, actually.
Yep. And I'll, in light of that, I'll try to make it concise wherever I can.
No hurry. We have also 2 hours next week, so just make sure you present what you want to present. Not next week, next Friday.
This is about sending multicast responses. So, and in particular notifications. This is coming from the topic that we have this asymmetry in where we can use multicast. We can use multicast in requests, and that's basically becoming very stable now. But for responses, we don't have anything, and this has led to possibly seen as weird constructions where the flow of what might be perceived as regular REST operations is inversed, and we had to post some things or put some things just in order to get them out to multiple devices. And really, this is not sparing us all those details of agreeing on something, because if we post somewhere, then they all have to be in a group and they'll have to have a resource. But we just haven't previously tackled the topic of how do we do observations and the other, how do we do requests kind of from a multicast source, in that here we have to synchronize the token. So multicast notifications is about adding multicast responses with a focus on actual multicast notifications. Next slide, please. So we introduce multicast responses. We define how the token space here works, in that it's still the client, under quotes, that's responsible for the token space, but the client is a multicast group. And the next best delegation point there is the server with whom this group is talking, because that's part of what fragments the token space. So the server is basically in charge of the tokens on behalf of the group of clients. Next slide, please. How this actually works is that the server sees that people are interested in a resource, whether it's by configuration or just when a threshold is crossed, creates an own request that it will then consider the consensus request or the configured request for that particular token, do as if it sent that request, store that request, and then start sending out responses to that imagined request that could never be serialized, but that was imagined to have been sent from a multicast address. When clients come in and try to observe this on unicast and the server is not inclined to answer them all individually, it can send what we call an informative response and an error response, so that the original the individual observation request is declined, but in the error response there is information how to hook into the request that is already going on from a multicast group. Next slide, please. So since the -03, we've updated the format of this response and really have been converging in one point of this design space. So the design space ranges from we are kind of taking apart the whole co-op messages, and in older versions we've had even particular co-op options expressed as fields in this response. And on the other hand of the design space, we have basically the whole co-op over UDP message serialized inside this. And what we are now using is what I think is the sweet spot, is that the request code and the options are all inside one co-op serialized byte string, which is very, very similar to what is happening inside OSCORE, and I think might come out as something like the transport agnostic form of the request and the response. And in addition, we have one CBOR array that encodes all the protocol-specific details, including a disambiguator that allows us to use co-op over any other multicast transport that we might come up with that is not UDP. And the details needed for that, which are basically the address and the port and the token, are all encoded in there. Next slide, please. I'll just skip over this to forward and come back to this. So to forward, please. The nice property about this new field is that we can make it work with proxies. So especially in the case of OSCORE protected multicasts. So in such a situation, the proxy has no way of knowing what's in that option, what's in the payload, because it's encrypted. And the client has to go through the proxy again and ask it to join that multicast group. And the way we are proposing this is to use that very same CBOR array that includes all this transport-specific information and send it along with the phantom request to the proxy again. This then allows the proxy to see that, oh, this is a non-option. This is an option that I have to understand. If it understands it, it can then not send out the request, because it would have to send it from the multicast address by the values in there, and instead join that multicast group and forward the responses to the original client. And what I think is particularly neat about this is that the original client doesn't even have to be aware of what UDP is. So if, say, that original client is sitting in a web browser that's talking to a cross proxy via co-op over WebSockets, it probably has never heard of UDP, but it can take that information as it is, pass it on to the proxy, and the proxy will either do the right thing or say, sorry, I can't do that for you. This just doesn't work. So this is where this transport information is used again. 2 slides back, please. So what else changed since Dash 04? Since Dash 03, we've updated the mechanism that helps us do the estimate of the number of active clients, based on the suggestions from Carsten on comparing the last bits of something. So we still go with randomness because we don't necessarily have good client identifiers we can use. But now basically the factor that the server uses to control how many responses it wants to get back is now expressed as an exponent. Thus much more compact, and thus also easier to compute for the client. So we now have pseudocode in the appendices that describe how this can be done very easily with a client within an embedded device. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think I've largely mentioned everything that's relevant here. Yeah, when proxies are used without end-to-end security, this whole process can be a bit more streamlined. But with end-to-end security, there is just no way for the proxy to look into the option in between. So there has to be some round tripping on the downstream end involved that gives the proxy the information that originally passed through it. 2 slides forward, please. So what are our open points? One more, please. We've just briefly after submission, we've noticed that there is still a few odd points around the proxy examples. So if you want to review this right now, we're happy to take your reviews, but please be aware that the proxy examples probably need a bit of more work. we'd like to tackle the questions in the next revisions of where and how we can negotiate about this, with the main question being, is there any point in negotiating this if the only possible outcome is that no, we can't use this anyway? Because if the server decides that it's too cumbersome for it to manage all those individual registrations, all those individual observations, and the client can't join a group, then really those two will not find together. A probably easier point is the topic of whether or not the last notification needs to be in the informative response. So right now it's mandatory. We think about making it optional, because that would roughly mimic what an observation over unicast looks like, because you can get a response back immediately, but you could just as well receive an empty egg, and whenever the server gets new information which it can pass on, it will actually do that, and the first response will just have to wait a tad longer. And finally, we do consider adding an appendix about how the server could be its own group manager, because it really has all the information, and this would allow streamlining the joining process a bit, because the informative response could also include all the material that the client really needs to join in the monitor role it needs to have for this group. And those are the points we also could use a bit of feedback from the working group from. Other than that, I think the next slide, please. The next steps are rather clear, and we are still hoping for a few reviews that have been announced in the last IETF meeting. Next slide. So thanks, and yeah, any input on especially the open points or anything else?
I still have it on my to-do list. Yeah, we hear you well. I have it on my to-do list to at least maybe do a review on this one. Is there some urgency to it, or?
No particular urgency, I think. The most important part of it to me is to make sure that to ensure that we've converged on the understanding of the basic principles, and to basically to not break this in other documents while the rest of it is growing. Yeah. But at some point also there will be the question of, is this mature enough that the working group could think about taking it up?
Mm-hmm. Esko, are you queuing or?
Well, I did have comments about that my audio was not connected, so
go ahead.
I think the question was on the last part. So was it the intention that the server becomes the group manager also for itself, for its own group? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Just wondering, does that have specific advantage in this case?
So the thing is, it would save a lot of. I mean, that group would only be used between that server and the clients, and might even be limited in terms of which resources on the server are accessible via this group. So this is not something where there is any larger audience to this group than the audience of that server itself.
Yeah, it's just the group of the interested clients basically that need to get the observations. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So if there are external groups that whose membership entails the privilege to view a set of resources on different servers, those groups would be obvious candidates for this as well. But unless this is the case, this might be kind of a shortcut option.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. Any more comments?
Thank you.
All right. So, Francesca, sorry. Please go ahead, Francesca.
Did I? adoption question. So is it for the chat?
You mean adoption of multicast notifications, or are we moving to the next one? From my understanding, please, Christian, correct me if I'm wrong. You still wanted a bit of another round to this before adoption, right? Or did I misunderstand?
Not necessarily. So what if we have rough consensus on the basic workings, which we haven't touched in a while, then I think this would be an option from my point of view. There's a lot of details that still need to be hammered out, but I don't see why this couldn't take place in the working group as well.
So just a disclaimer, because I don't know if it was clear. Obviously, I'm one of the authors, so obviously I think that this should be adopted and move forward. And yeah, there was.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, we can. I guess we could. Marco, please let me know if you agree or disagree. I guess we could. We didn't plan for a specific show of hands today, but we could do a show of hands on the chat of Miteco chat. Well, not the chat, but the application next to it, and see how does the group feel for adopting this document now. Otherwise, my understanding was that there was no specific urgency on this one.
No,
but
I agree.
There
is no, as Christian said, there is no real urgency, but I think that it would be good.
Yeah. Yes, so we can do a if it's okay with you, Francesca, we could do a quick show of hands, virtual hands on the Miteco, and like that without any confirmation. I mean, anything else would happen on the mailing list as well, but at least we could get a feeling for what the group thinks, if that's okay with you. Of course. Yeah. Marco?
Yes, and just before, as an author, I just agree with the other co-authors.
Yes, of course. There's a that's reasonable. Okay, how do we phrase the question? Like, would the group be interested in adopting this document? I guess that's a good phrasing. Typing it now. So I'm gonna click Start Session. I guess everybody knows this show of hands tool is on the left from your chat panel. It's a new feature. So let's try it out. I'm clicking it now. It should appear on there. So you just need to raise your hand if you agree. Do not raise your hand if you don't agree. As simple as that. And I guess we can. I don't know. I don't have real-time feedback. Actually, I do have real-time feedback. I take it back. Sorry.
What is this document? Never
asked. The one on the screen. The one on the screen. Observe multicast notifications.
Okay.
You have it there in the main screen. We see 11 raised hands. That's already quite a number. And one not to. Okay. By the way, please feel free to voice any comments, positive or negative, for adoption of the document.
So are you going to ask the other questions, like who's going to review and so on at this point in time?
Yeah. I will do that. And you are already actually added as a reviewer in a way of a previous version or of the current version, and so am I, and so is Joran. So I guess in addition to those, I will ask the question. But let's finish the session. I guess nobody else is raising the hand. So we have 12, like for the minute takers, we have 12 that had voiced positively for the adoption of the document, and 1 that has voiced negatively out of 31 participants right now in the meeting. So I guess this is pretty positive. We can confirm in the, Joran, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to ask what, actually, I didn't understand what it means to not raise your hand in a position to not respond at all. I didn't understand the difference.
No, so yeah, that's a good point. The options available were to raise hand or not to raise hand. So I guess raise hand is pretty clear. You are in favor of adopting a document. You do not raise your hand, or I guess you raised your hand negatively. I don't even know actually what that means. That's a good point. So I guess you can say that there is some people that are idle that don't even bother to click on the thing, which is equivalent to not raising the hand in a way. But we only look, as usual, to the positive show hands, right? So this is not a great tool for humming because I don't get a feeling for anything. Should I ask another question, like who does not want to adopt the document?
You could do that, or just say, because there was one person who, when you called the question, you said, if you don't want to adopt it, click do not raise your hand.
Yeah.
So if the person who clicked that meant I don't want to adopt it, that person should please unmute and tell us what the objection is. And that's probably the best way to handle it at this point.
I can tell what the issue was. I did not read the document yet in that much detail, so yeah, it was not a negative.
Okay.
Negative raise your hand is just not raising the hand.
Okay.
Sure yet.
Yeah. Thank you, Esko. Okay, we're still in there's comments in the queue. Joran. Okay, Carsten then.
We probably don't need to go into detail about this humming/raise hand tool, but I've had the discussion what it actually means in every meeting I've been in so far, and I think it would be good to actually define it at some point in time.
Yeah, Marco and I were practicing these tools yesterday, but we actually didn't went so deep into details on the. I mean, we thought we nailed it and we knew how it worked, but actually in practice it's a bit different. Yeah. So, anyways,
yesterday Barry suggested to actually ask the other question: Do you not agree with adopting as well? Yeah. So essentially, you have 3 by 3 ways to answer.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that, but anyways, I think basically we got mostly positive, all positive comments with what Esko just mentioned in the call. So I will need more reviewers. So we do have Joran and Carsten. It'd be nice to have all the potential reviewers. So please, volunteers are needed. Esko, you're unmuted. Do you want to volunteer or?
No, that was not an intention, but you can add me to the list anyway. So.
Okay, that's nice. I will do that more often than if it is just about asking.
There is Thomas in the queue actually volunteering.
Yes. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's enough. We have some reviewers. We have done the call in the meeting, and we will have to confirm on the mailing list. But it seems that everybody is interested on this document. Marco, well, you're co-author, but you're also co-chair, so okay. Perfect.
Nothing more.
So thank you, Christian. There's some chat. Yes, thank you. Thank you both. Let's move on. We still have time. 10 minutes more. If I manage to make this thing work.
It should work for one more presentation.
Yes, and it's okay. So I guess Francesca, you'll be moved to Friday if that's okay with you, right? Sorry for making you wait. And okay, thank you. And we move to Esko. Sorry. It's hard to track the chat and the screening and everything at the same time. There you go. So, Esko, please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so this document is the group.com proxy document. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the background of this is using the co-op group communication support. And what we contribute here is more details on the description of how proxy operations can be done for group communication. Next slide, please. So a recap of how this works. There is a client sending a unicast request to the proxy. And the proxy will translate that into a multicast group communication request. And the idea we have is that the client should indicate that it's interested in and capable of handling multiple responses, and also how long the proxy should collect and forward back responses, because normally the client determines how long it listens to responses. Now that needs to be done by the proxy, and we use a new co-op option for that. The proxy will actually remove that option. Now the proxy gets back the responses from the origin service, and yeah, it also includes for each of these responses a new co-op option, response forwarding, to indicate to the client which server responded, so that it can distinguish the individual responses. So it gets an IP address also for each responding server. And also here, group OSCORE can be used for end-to-end security. And also possible is to use DTLS or OSCORE security between the client and the proxy directly. Okay, next slide, please. So the updates that we did was, editorial reorganization of the text for observation. Now there's some more dedicated subsections added there. And yeah, the observation is also explained in more detail. So the idea is that the proxy just keeps forwarding the notifications back until the observation terminates. So this will extend beyond the time that is indicated for normal responses collection. So this will just persist basically until termination. Security considerations are updated. Also, the new co-op options have updated semantics and usage. And one thing is that there's now a description also how a chain of proxies would work. So it's not that different from a single proxy, but we have a chain of multiple proxies that basically invoke other proxies until the last one sends the actual multicast request. That's described in a bit of more detail. Okay, next one. Yeah, this is a description of the multicast signaling option that is used by the client to the proxy. And there's a time value in there. So this is indicating how long the proxy should forward back the responses. And now a new thing added here is that the time value can also be 0. So that means the proxy is basically waiting 0 time for collecting the responses. So we figured this could be still useful to have. So that's basically indicating to the proxy that there's no need to forward back the responses, but still the request will work. And we also advise that it should be used together with a no response option, because ideally the server should not be sending those responses back if no one is interested to them. But we wanted to still keep the two options independent from each other, not entangle them too much. So client, if there's really some weird need to, it can also use it without a no response option. So here we are also requesting feedback on, so you can think on it during the presentation or later. Can get back to it. Next slide, please. Yeah, here's the response forwarding option. So that's used from the proxy to the client, typically. So the client can use it to distinguish the responses and also the servers that were sending those responses.
So sometimes you can basically get some information on the client already, of course, from the payload of the response or from the security context of it. But this also is a basic way to indicate to the client, okay, where is this server, what IP address did it respond from? So that helps the client to be able to contact the server in unicast one-to-one if it wants to. So either via the proxy or directly, if possible. So this format is now updated to have an address and optional port in the value. And if the port is omitted, then the default port is assumed, which is the same port as was the destination of the group request. So that's the most common case. So usually the port would be omitted then. Before it used to be an absolute URI with the scheme and the host name. Now we have made it smaller, so that's a positive thing. And there's also less parsing to do for the client, useful for constrained clients. The downside is that it's not possible for the proxy anymore to insert a DNS host name. That could be done if it's a URI. So normally that wouldn't happen because the proxy will only know the IP address of the responders. And why use a DNS host name in that case? So this seems like a reasonable thing to do to make it less generic. So you can also think about that for a while. That's a question also to the group. So can we live with it, that it's less generic but still usable in, I think, almost all cases. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is about the support for a chain of proxies. So what each proxy will do, it will, if there's a chain, it will send the request onwards to a configured proxy in the next hop. And the last proxy that is actually not configured with a next hop proxy will do the operation as intended. So it will remove the multicast signaling option and send out the group request. And in the draft we have some specific timing descriptions also related to that. So I think that there's no time to explain that in detail. And the idea is that if the time runs out, so suppose that there's a long chain of proxies, for example, or the client provided a too small time value, then proxy can reply with 5.05, proxy not supported. And then it will also include the multicast signaling option in the response, but then indicating a time value that is acceptable. So that basically tells the client or the proxy before it what minimum time value would be possible, so that it still can serve the request. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this concludes the chain of proxies explanation. So responses go back each time to the previous hop, and in this case only the last proxy. So that's the one that sent out basically the group request and gets the actual responses. That will add the response forwarding options. And these other proxies in the chain, so that are before it, do not alter or remove the response forwarding option. Okay, and then if we do that, it will all work. Next slide, please. Yeah, then we can have OSCORE also between client and proxy. And that can at the same time coexist with group OSCORE used between the client and servers. So that's the end-to-end usage of group OSCORE. And well, we get some particular processing things that come up if we do that. So we need to treat, for example, some class U options that are unprotected now as class E, and these are listed here. And there was a bit of a thing that there could be more options in the future, co-op options that also need to be need to get the same treatment. So a question that came up from this is, well, is there any general rule to identify them so that, yeah, that you can basically know already in advance, specify, okay, which options need to be treated differently in this case. So that's still an open question here. Do we have any generic rules here? I think there was an
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm just thinking that we are now on the hour, and
Yes.
you have there's still quite a few slides, right? There's no, actually
Yeah.
not.
Well, one or two.
We try to continue. Then sorry. Then let's try to extend a bit more. But just FYI, like we are on the hour at the moment.
Yeah.
We can continue also next Friday too. But you please go ahead.
Yeah, we could take maybe the questions to next Friday also if there are further questions to this, and leave the discussion for Friday as well. Okay, maybe then the next slide. Just see if this was the last one. No, that was not yet the last one. So here's a proposal here. So I think yeah, we need to get back to that later. Let's see. Let's start to recall. Maybe next slide to see if we have a conclusion summary. Okay. Yeah. So in summary, we define proxy operations for co-op group communication, and we define 2 new co-op options to have that working correctly. And next steps that we have are, well, work on these open questions, of course, and also the idea was to define HTTP headers so that we can also tackle the use case of HTTP to co-op cross proxies. So this would enable a HTTP client in Unicast to basically talk to a co-op group and get a collection of responses back from the group. And then there's the need for reviews, and I think we have also there promised from an earlier meeting is Christian, Karsten, and Francesca. But more, of course, would be welcome, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Esko. And sorry for the pushing on the time. Any comments, any thoughts, please? We will extend the time just a couple of minutes more, and then people are... Go ahead, Christian. No need to raise your hand, by the way, like we can just go.
On the topic of class U to class E option, I think that would really be all options unless the proxy needs to understand them because it's a hop by hop option. So everything that comes, this is not treating a message and then splitting it up into class U and class E. This is really taking the whole message, unless something is basically needs to be unraveled by the time it passes through this hop, which is the hop by hop options. So I think that it should be the general rule to include everything.
Okay, that sounds at least useful, and it's clear what you need to protect them. Yeah.
All right, before we get kicked off, any more comments? I've never been kicked off, actually. That would be interesting. But okay, then enjoy the rest of the day, guys. Thank you, lady, and for the time, and see you next Friday. Today, I will see some of you, I guess, in RATS and ASDF, and maybe TLS in 30 minutes. So have fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
See you on Friday.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.